Millionaire abandons her husband, but 17 years later, sees him with young woman identical to her. Our video delves deep into the emotional journey of both individuals, exploring themes of love, regret, and redemption. We examine the choices people make in pursuit of happiness and the unforeseen consequences that follow. The Millionaire's story serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities of relationships and the importance of cherishing the bonds we form.
The day was supposed to be ordinary. Eliza Vanderbilt, dressed in a Chanel suit and signature red-soled heels, strolled through the Beverly Hills Mall with the air of someone who owned the world. But the moment she spotted Alex, her ex-husband, her polished confidence cracked. Beside him, a young woman laughed, her head tilted in a way Eliza knew intimately. It was as though she had time traveled to meet her younger self. But that couldn't be, could it? 17 years had passed since Eliza walked out on Alex, leaving behind their cramped apartment, their dreams, and his shattered heart. She told herself it was necessary, a survival instinct fueled by her need for luxury, freedom, and the life she'd always imagined. But now, facing him, her perfectly constructed facade wavered. What haunted her most wasn't seeing Alex happy. It was the girl, the uncanny resemblance to her own youthful features. Eliza hesitated, gripping the leather strap of her Hermes bag until her knuckles whitened. Memories flooded her, unbidden and raw. Alex's hopeful eyes as he promised things would get better. The love letters he wrote but never sent. The nights they spent counting stars because they couldn't afford real dates. She used to believe he was the love of her life, until she convinced herself otherwise. But was it regret creeping up on her, or something else entirely? The young woman flipped her hair over her shoulder, exposing a crescent-shaped scar near her collarbone. Eliza's breath caught. She had the same scar, earned from a childhood accident that left her terrified of heights. Panic coursed through her veins. This was beyond coincidence. It was as if fate were taunting her, dragging secrets from her past into the present, demanding she confront them. Her mind raced. Who was this girl? Alex appeared older, wearier, his dark hair dusted with gray, but his laughter was the same, deep, genuine, and a sound that used to feel like home. Watching him with the girl, who appeared to hang on his every word, made Eliza's stomach twist. There was a warmth between them she couldn't ignore. Questions pulsed in her head. Was this Alex's daughter? If so, how could she share Eliza's face, her expressions, her scars? Her steps faltered as she debated whether to approach them or retreat. Her world, meticulously curated with designer labels and million-dollar deals, suddenly felt fragile, as though it could crumble under the weight of old choices and unanswered questions. She ducked into a nearby jewelry store, pretending to admire the glittering diamonds in the window while keeping Alex in her line of sight. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing with unresolved guilt. The shop's cool air offered no comfort. Instead, it amplified the storm inside her. The sales associate, eager to please a potential buyer, approached with a tray of emerald necklaces. Eliza waved her off distractedly. Her gaze stayed fixed on Alex and the girl, who were now examining a display of custom watches. A lump formed in her throat. Had she ruined not just one life but many with her departure? Eliza's phone buzzed, breaking her trance. It was Malcolm, her current husband, asking when she'd be home for dinner. Home. The word felt hollow now, a sharp contrast to the sense of belonging she'd once found in Alex's arms. Shoving the phone back into her purse, she clenched her jaw. If she walked away now, she might never know the truth. But what if uncovering it unraveled everything she'd worked so hard to build? Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. The girl leaned into Alex, whispering something that made him laugh. The sound reverberated through Eliza, slicing through layers of defense she'd constructed over the years. She couldn't avoid this confrontation any longer, even if it meant facing the version of herself she'd buried long ago. Summoning the last of her courage, she stepped forward. Her heels clicked on the polished marble floor, a drumbeat marking the countdown to a reckoning she hadn't anticipated. As she approached, she rehearsed 1,000 opening lines in her head, but none felt right. Alex glanced up, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something she couldn't quite name. And then, the young woman turned to face Eliza fully, and the world tilted on its axis. The years hadn't been kind to Alex, but they had shaped him in ways he hadn't expected. After Eliza left, he spent countless nights grasping for a lifeline, any scrap of hope that might pull him from the depths of his despair. At first, he drowned himself in work, taking double shifts as a mechanic, his hands perpetually slick with grease and exhaustion. Friends tried to set him up with new women, but he never got past the first date. No one could match the fire that Eliza had burned into his memory. Time was supposed to heal all wounds, but for Alex, it only dulled the ache. Years later, he'd finally begun to piece together a version of happiness, a life built from the wreckage of broken promises. He had met Marianne, a gentle soul with a love of gardening and laughter that melted his remaining cynicism. They married quietly, a small ceremony in a rose garden. But even then, he never quite let himself believe in fairy tales again. And then she came. A year ago, the young woman had burst into his life with reckless energy, looking every bit the spitting image of Eliza in her prime. She called herself Sky, claimed she was searching for answers, but wouldn't say about what. Her arrival had unsettled Alex from the moment they met, and it wasn't just because of her uncanny resemblance to his ex-wife. There was something else, something deep and magnetic that pulled at his gut. Sky had stumbled into his auto shop on a rainy afternoon, dripping wet and defiant. She'd had car trouble, and he'd offered to help. When she lifted her chin and introduced herself, he'd felt an unexplainable jolt. Her eyes were bright, full of a familiar fire, and a shiver had passed through him, like a ghost had brushed against his soul. Still, he didn't ask questions. He had learned life never gave answers easily. Instead, he offered her a cup of steaming coffee and listened. Over the months, she had woven herself into his world, becoming an unexpected companion in his otherwise predictable existence. They'd spend hours talking about music, philosophy, and the kind of wild dreams he'd forgotten he used to have. Yet, for all her openness, Sky was a labyrinth of secrets. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, a shadow of sadness would cloud her eyes, and he wondered what kind of pain she carried. He never pushed, never pried. But his heart grew attached. What unsettled Alex most was how desperately he wished to protect her, as if she were more than a stranger. Marianne had noticed too, the way he worried over Sky's safety, the way his mood shifted when Sky left after their conversations. One evening, Marianne had asked outright, "Who is she, really?" He tried to brush it off, claimed she was just some lost kid in need of guidance. But even he didn't believe his own words. Deep down, he sensed there was a reason for Sky's arrival. A month ago, Sky had shown him a picture she kept hidden in her wallet. It was an old faded photo of a woman with laughing eyes and dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Alex had nearly dropped his wrench when he realized it was Eliza. He tried to mask his shock, but Sky noticed, her gaze sharp and searching. She'd asked if he knew the woman, and he'd lied, his voice shaky. No, never seen her before. He couldn't risk Sky disappearing if he told the truth. After that, Alex had started losing sleep. The resemblance between Sky and Eliza was too perfect, too precise. It made no sense. Every theory he came up with crumbled under scrutiny. It kept him awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd missed something crucial in his past. Marianne grew frustrated with his distracted demeanor, but he couldn't bring himself to explain. How could he articulate a fear he didn't understand? In the present, as Eliza approached him in the mall, Alex's mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and guarded hope. His heart thudded in his chest, a traitor threatening to expose emotions he'd buried long ago. Sky, sensing the tension, looked between Alex and the approaching woman. Her laughter died on her lips, and confusion clouded her expression. The world seemed to hold its breath as past and present collided. Eliza stood before him, every bit the queen of her empire, yet her eyes betrayed a vulnerability he hadn't seen since their youth. For a moment, they were just two people, once deeply in love, now separated by a chasm of time and regret. Alex swallowed, words failing him, and all he could do was brace himself for the impact of whatever storm she had brought into his life. He knew, instinctively, that nothing would ever be the same. Eliza found herself inches away from Alex, her carefully constructed world spinning. Her throat tightened as she met his gaze, searching for the familiar warmth she'd abandoned long ago. But the years had changed them both. Alex's eyes, once full of endless optimism, were now shadowed by wariness. Yet, the most unnerving presence was the young woman standing beside him. Sky's face was a mirror of Eliza's younger self, down to the dimple that appeared only when she half smiled. The silence stretched, brittle and suffocating, before Eliza managed a fragile, Alex. The name fell from her lips like a stone, dragging up memories she thought she had buried for good. Alex nodded, his jaw clenching and unclenching as though trying to contain an onslaught of emotions. The girl, Sky, glanced between them, her curiosity morphing into suspicion. Eliza's heart thudded painfully, and she forced herself to look at Sky without flinching. How could this be real? Sky crossed her arms, defensive but trying to mask it with nonchalance. "Do you two know each other?" Her voice was casual, but her eyes were sharp, waiting for answers. Eliza's breath caught. The girl's voice was a blend of youthful determination and a softness that tugged at Eliza's soul, as if echoing the voice she'd once possessed. An uneasy realization settled over her, like a ghostly hand gripping her heart. Who was Sky, truly? Alex sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's complicated," he said, his voice thick with an emotion Eliza couldn't quite name. He was still protective, she realized, still shielding the people he loved from pain. But this time, it wasn't her he was defending. The betrayal stung more than she'd expected. Yet, she couldn't blame him. She had left him shattered, forced to rebuild himself without any promises of closure. And now she was the intruder in a life he had painstakingly reconstructed. Eliza straightened her shoulders, her instincts as a businesswoman kicking in. "I'm Eliza," she said, offering her hand to Sky. The girl's hesitation was brief, her grip firm but cool. The touch felt surreal, as if Eliza were grasping a version of herself from another timeline. Every second spent in Sky's presence twisted reality further. Eliza forced herself to focus, to steady the tremor in her hands. Her voice, however, betrayed her. "You look so familiar." Sky narrowed her eyes, suspicion deepening. "People say I look like my mom," she replied, though the words held a peculiar edge. It was a puzzle piece that refused to fit, and Eliza's mind scrambled for answers. Her mother. Eliza's knees weakened slightly, but she held her ground. Something dark and long forgotten stirred in her memory, whispers of a secret that shouldn't exist. Alex stepped in, cutting through the tension with a tight smile. "Why don't we all sit down?" he suggested. They found a nearby bench in the mall's atrium, surrounded by fountains and the murmurs of shoppers oblivious to the unfolding drama. Eliza sat stiffly, hands clasped in her lap. Sky perched beside Alex, her protectiveness of him painfully obvious. The scene reminded Eliza of how she used to cling to Alex during their early years, desperate to hold on to something pure amid the chaos of their shared poverty. The ache of nostalgia was almost unbearable. "I'm not here to disrupt your life," Eliza began, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Her gaze darted to Sky, who met it with unyielding defiance. "But you have to understand. This resemblance, it's impossible." Her voice faltered, and she hated how vulnerable she sounded. It had been years since she'd felt unsure of herself, but this moment was cracking her armor. Sky didn't flinch. "Maybe you're the one with answers," she shot back. Alex shifted uncomfortably. He had always been the peacemaker, even when he had every right to be angry. But now he seemed tired, as though he'd already fought this battle in his mind too many times. "We're all tired of secrets," he said softly, his eyes flicking between the two women. "It's time for the truth." The irony wasn't lost on Eliza. She had built her empire on manipulation and negotiation, yet here she was, utterly powerless. She realized then that she feared the truth as much as she craved it. Eliza drew a shaky breath, her mind racing back 17 years, to the decision that had ruined more than one life. Her success hadn't come without costs, deals with devils she never spoke of. But there was something else, a piece of the past that lurked just beyond memory, a connection she hadn't allowed herself to question until now. Sky's existence was a riddle, one Eliza couldn't afford to ignore. But how far was she willing to go to unearth it? A sudden noise from a nearby child's laughter broke the tension, but the spell wasn't entirely lifted. Sky sat, her arms still crossed but her posture leaning forward, waiting. Alex, too, seemed braced for impact, as if they all sensed the ground crumbling beneath them. Eliza finally met Alex's gaze. "When did she come into your life?" she asked, each word a lifeline she clung to, hoping it would lead her closer to answers and redemption. Sky's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her expression cool, masking the storm raging inside her. This woman, Eliza, was more than just an unexpected figure from Alex's past. There was something unspoken, a tension that felt as though it had been building for years, only now breaking the surface. Sky wasn't new to confusion and half-truths. Her whole life felt like a mystery wrapped in secrets. But this, seeing Eliza's stunned reaction, made her wonder if the answers she sought were finally within reach. When Alex had first taken Sky in, she had been adrift, moving from city to city, chasing a name she didn't fully understand, Vanderbilt. It was a name her mother had whispered in a fevered delirium on her deathbed, and one Sky had clung to ever since, hoping it held the key to the fractured puzzle of her family. She never expected to find an actual person attached to it, let alone someone who looked like an older version of herself. The shock had barely worn off. Sky had practiced this moment in her mind countless times, preparing to confront the ghosts that haunted her. Yet, sitting across from Eliza, she felt small, like a child caught eavesdropping on an adult conversation. The woman radiated an elegance that made Sky want to shrink into her leather jacket and scuffed combat boots. But she refused to back down, not after everything she had fought through to get here. "You didn't answer my question," Sky said, her voice a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "Do you know who I am?" Eliza faltered, her carefully guarded expression cracking, if only for a moment. Alex reached out to place a steadying hand on Sky's shoulder. His touch was gentle, but Sky could feel the tension in his fingers. He had been her rock, even when she gave him nothing but half-answers and restlessness. The guilt simmered beneath her surface. She had lied to him, or at least never given him the full truth. But how could she when she barely understood it herself? And now, it was all spilling out in this glamorous, soulless shopping mall. Eliza's eyes darkened with something like recognition, but she quickly masked it. "I think we might share more than I realized," she admitted, her voice cracking ever so slightly. The vulnerability shocked Sky, who had expected a woman like Eliza to be unbreakable. But instead, she saw fear there, and something else. Maybe hope? The moment was unsettling, a reflection of how easily the past could crash into the present, leaving everyone vulnerable. Sky's hand went to the crescent-shaped scar on her collarbone, a nervous habit she developed as a kid. Her mother had once told her it was a mark of survival, a badge of a life that refused to be ordinary. But her mother had never told her who her father was, or why she spent so many nights crying over an old photo she kept hidden. It was only after she passed away that Sky found letters she wasn't supposed to read, correspondence full of names like Vanderbilt and Alex and hints of betrayal Sky barely understood. Alex watched Eliza closely, as if he were trying to decipher a code. He'd been so kind to Sky, a stranger with no proof of who she was beyond the stories she spun. But now he was beginning to piece things together, and Sky felt an ache of guilt for dragging him into the chaos of her life. Yet, she couldn't regret it. He had become her family, something she'd never thought she deserved. If she lost him, she didn't know how she'd bear it. "What brought you here, Sky?" Alex asked, his voice low and steady, as though he feared the answer. His question pierced through her defenses, and Sky swallowed hard. She had always avoided that conversation, afraid to lay her cards on the table. But now, with Eliza here, the whole facade was crumbling. Maybe it was time to tell the truth, or as much of it as she understood. "I was looking for someone," Skye admitted. Her eyes locked with Eliza's. "And I think I found her." Eliza's breath hitched, and she covered her mouth with a trembling hand. For the first time, she looked less like a billionaire businesswoman and more like someone grappling with loss and confusion. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her polished exterior slipping further. Skye leaned forward, searching Eliza's face for any sign that she might be more than just a ghost from her mother's past. "My mother's name was Rebecca," Skye said. "But she told me that somewhere I had another family. And I think you know something about that." The revelation hit Alex like a physical blow. He sat back, his face pale as the pieces began to fit together in his mind. He turned to Eliza, eyes full of questions he couldn't bring himself to voice. But Skye knew. She could feel the shift in the air, the way the world seemed to balance on a razor's edge, waiting for a truth that could change everything. Eliza seemed on the verge of collapse, her carefully curated poise finally cracking under the weight of whatever memories she was wrestling with. Skye felt her hands tremble, but she clenched them into fists, willing herself to stay strong. Her whole life had been a maze of unanswered questions and dead ends. Now, at the precipice of something real, she couldn't turn back, even if it hurt. Especially if it hurt. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I need to know who I am. And why I look like you." The vulnerability cost her more than she cared to admit, but it was her last hope. Eliza's eyes glistened with tears she couldn't hold back. Her lips parted, and for a moment, she looked ready to confess something monumental, something that had been buried for far too long. But just as she was about to speak, her phone rang sharply, breaking the tension like a glass shattering on concrete. She fumbled for it, her hand shaking, but the call wasn't what really silenced her. It was the name flashing on the screen, Rebecca. Eliza's entire world seemed to tilt on its axis as the name on her phone screen glared at her like an accusation. Rebecca. Her fingers trembled, and she barely managed to silence the call before it could break the fragile moment that had trapped them all in its intensity. The name brought back a storm of memories she'd spent 17 years trying to forget. Memories of whispered secrets, desperate choices, and a betrayal so deep it had cost her everything. The air between them thickened. Alex's gaze bore into her, a silent plea for an explanation she wasn't ready to give. But there was no escaping now, no room for half-truths or delays. Not with Skye sitting there wide-eyed, her hands clenched in her lap as if bracing herself for impact. Eliza drew a deep breath, trying to steady herself, to summon the composure that had made her a titan in the business world. But this wasn't a boardroom, and the stakes here were infinitely more personal. "You knew my mother, didn't you?" Skye's voice cut through the silence, each word carrying the weight of years spent in the dark. Eliza flinched, as though the question had struck her physically. She had always been good at burying her past, but now it had come roaring back to life, demanding to be reckoned with. She couldn't run from it any longer. She had to face the girl in front of her, a girl who looked so heartbreakingly familiar it was almost too much to bear. Eliza nodded slowly, her throat tightening. "Yes," she admitted, her voice cracking under the strain of the confession. "I knew Rebecca." The admission hung heavy in the air, a ghost resurrected, filling the space between them. Skye's eyes widened, a mix of relief and fear playing across her face. Eliza's mind raced, trying to piece together what Skye knew and what she still didn't understand. There were layers to this. Things she had never shared with anyone, not even Alex. Alex sat motionless, his face a canvas of disbelief and confusion. "You never mentioned her," he said quietly, his voice thick with an emotion that twisted the knife of guilt deeper into Eliza's heart. It wasn't just what she had left behind that haunted her now, it was who she had hurt. Alex deserved answers, too, but how could she give them without unraveling herself in the process? She met his gaze, searching for forgiveness she knew she had no right to ask for. "It wasn't something I could talk about," Eliza whispered. She clenched her jaw, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to drown her. "Rebecca and we were close once, in ways I never imagined would come back to haunt me." Her voice wavered, and she closed her eyes briefly, fighting for control. The memories were too vivid, a young, idealistic Rebecca with dreams too large for the world she lived in, and Eliza herself, torn between loyalty and ambition. Skye leaned forward, her voice fierce and unyielding. "Why didn't she ever tell me?" she demanded, her pain cutting through the tension like a blade. "Why did she keep this part of her life from me?" Eliza opened her eyes, meeting the raw desperation in Skye's expression. The girl deserved the truth, but Eliza wasn't sure how to explain a past she had barely made peace with herself. It had been too complicated, too full of choices that could never be undone. "She kept you safe," Eliza replied, her voice barely more than a whisper. That's what she wanted most. Skye's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to shed, and Eliza's chest ached at the sight. She had never thought she'd face this moment, let alone be forced to justify decisions that had shattered so many lives. Yet, there was more she hadn't said, a secret she had sworn to take to her grave. But now, she wondered if that silence had caused more harm than good. Alex rubbed his temples, as if trying to grasp the threads of the unraveling story. "Rebecca," he murmured, testing the name on his tongue. He looked at Eliza, betrayal etched across his face. "You kept this from me, too? After everything we went through?" His voice was low, but the hurt in it was unmistakable. Eliza couldn't blame him. She had made a habit of leaving chaos in her wake, and here she was, doing it all over again. Tears pricked the corners of Eliza's eyes, but she willed them away. "I thought I was protecting you," she said, the words falling like ash. "But I was also protecting myself from the consequences of the choices I made." The confession cost her more than she cared to admit. She had always worn her strength like armor, but now, stripped of her defenses, she felt more exposed than she ever had in her life. Skye watched her, her expression unreadable. "Then explain," Skye said, her voice cracking. "I've spent my whole life not knowing where I came from. And now you show up, and everything is more confusing than ever." She glanced at Alex, her gaze softening momentarily. "I thought I was starting to understand, but now," she broke off, her words dissolving into a shaky breath. Eliza's heart splintered at the girl's anguish. She hadn't asked to be caught up in a web of secrets spun long before she was born. Eliza knew there was no going back now. Whatever came next would alter all their lives irrevocably. She swallowed hard, steeling herself. "Rebecca and I made a promise once," she began, her voice heavy with the weight of the past. "We swore to protect the people we loved, even if it meant sacrificing everything." She met Skye's gaze, the truth a tremor on her lips. "You're part of that promise, Skye. And it's time you knew everything." The silence that followed was deafening, a moment stretched taut with anticipation. But just as Eliza braced herself to continue, her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't silence it. With trembling hands, she answered. The voice on the other end was soft, familiar, and it shattered her resolve. "Eliza," said the voice she had long thought gone. "It's Rebecca. We need to talk." Eliza felt the phone slip slightly in her grip as the voice she had thought she'd never hear again spoke her name. Rebecca. It was as though a ghost had crossed the veil, the past reaching forward to make the present unbearable. A hollow ache filled her chest, and her gaze flickered to Skye and Alex, both watching her with expressions full of expectation and confusion. "Rebecca," she whispered, her voice wavering. "Is it really you?" "Yes," came the reply, quiet but resolute, carrying a lifetime of hurt and secrets. "I know you're with them. It's time we stop hiding from the truth." The line crackled, and Eliza's vision blurred with tears she couldn't hold back any longer. Everything was unraveling faster than she could process, and Rebecca's voice, alive and so real, sent a shockwave through her soul. Skye's eyes were wide, a mixture of hope and terror warring within them. Alex reached for Eliza's free hand, his touch grounding her in a moment that felt completely surreal. The past 17 years played in her mind like a rapid montage, leaving Alex, building her empire, burying Rebecca in her memory, and now this, standing at the brink of truths she had fought so hard to forget. "Where are you?" Eliza managed, her voice shaking. It felt strange to be asking this, to be seeking the woman she had once been inseparable from. Rebecca's sigh came through the line, heavy and filled with an unspoken sorrow. "I'm close," she said. "Come to the park by the old carousel in an hour. We need to talk, all of us." The line went dead, leaving Eliza holding the phone to her ear, as though she could will the conversation back to life. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then reality slammed into her, and she had to blink to clear the fog of disbelief. Alex's grip on her hand tightened. Was that? His voice trailed off, unable to say the name. Eliza nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Beside him, Sky's lip trembled, and she hugged herself as though trying to hold her pieces together. The young woman looked so small, so vulnerable, and Eliza felt a wave of maternal protectiveness she didn't quite understand. She owed Sky more than half-truths and silence. She owed her everything. "That was my mother," Sky said, her voice cracking. It wasn't a question but a statement, one weighted with the impossible. Her hands began to shake, and she turned her gaze on Eliza, seeking something, an anchor, a hope, anything. "You said she was gone. How could she be alive?" The accusation in her tone cut deeper than a blade, and Eliza flinched, the guilt crashing over her. There were explanations, but none of them would make the pain any less real. Eliza swallowed hard, feeling the brittle dam of her strength about to burst. "It's complicated," she began, but she knew how hollow that sounded. "I thought she was gone too. There are things you don't know, things I never wanted anyone to know." She turned to Alex, whose eyes had darkened with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. "And I'm not sure how to explain them in a way that makes sense." Alex released her hand, drawing back as if the distance would help him make sense of the chaos. "Explain it now, Eliza," he demanded, his voice harsher than she had ever heard it. "You owe us the truth." His betrayal was raw, and Eliza knew she deserved it. Everything she had once thought buried had clawed its way back to the surface, and there was no escaping the reckoning she had tried so hard to avoid. Sky's tears spilled over, her voice full of cracks and fissures. "All I wanted was to find out who I really was," she whispered, her voice splintering. "And now, none of this makes sense. My whole life has been a lie." The anguish in her words shattered Eliza, who had thought herself immune to breaking. Sky had spent years searching for a connection, an origin story that could make her feel whole, and Eliza had been complicit in keeping her in the dark. Eliza's vision blurred, her heart pounding. She had never imagined facing this moment, yet here she was, held accountable by the very people who had the most right to hate her. "I never meant for you to be hurt," she said, her voice thick with sorrow. "But there are things you don't know about Rebecca's past. About our past." She forced herself to meet Sky's gaze. "And I'm ready to tell you everything. But we need to meet her first." Sky inhaled sharply, her expression morphing from pain to disbelief. "You think I can just trust you?" she asked, her voice raw. "After everything? After years of feeling lost?" Alex's face was unreadable, but the hurt was clear. They were both shattered, their sense of security crumbling before her eyes. Eliza had always been good at commanding rooms full of power-hungry executives, but this was something no amount of money or influence could fix. The truth hovered, waiting to be revealed, and it terrified Eliza. Yet she knew there was no backing down. Rebecca's voice had stirred something in her, a fear and a longing she hadn't felt in nearly 2 decades. It was time to face the past, no matter how ugly or painful it was. "Trust me," she finally whispered, desperation creeping into her tone. "Please. If not for me, then for the answers you deserve." For a long moment, no one spoke. The mall buzzed with activity around them, unaware of the tectonic shift happening in this small circle. Finally, Sky nodded, wiping her tears roughly with the back of her hand. "1 hour," she said. "But if you don't tell me the truth, all of it," her voice wavered, but she pushed through. "Then I'm done." Alex nodded in grim agreement. The three of them, bound by a shared past none of them fully understood, stood to face the reckoning awaiting them. The old park hadn't changed much over the years. The carousel, with its faded horses and cracked mirrors, stood as a relic of forgotten joy, spinning lazily under a canopy of drooping willows. Eliza stood at the edge of the path, her heart pounding as she took in the scene, 1,000 memories clamoring for attention. The laughter of children echoed faintly, a haunting reminder of simpler times, and it felt almost cruel that they were meeting here, in this place where the past bled into the present. Alex was beside her, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with suspicion and worry. He hadn't said a word on the drive over, and his silence was a knife twisting in Eliza's chest. Skye lingered a few steps behind them, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though shielding her heart from any more blows. Her gaze darted around the park, equal parts wary and hopeful. Every step closer to this moment had been a trial, and now, standing in its shadow, none of them knew what to expect. Skye's fingers fidgeted, her usual bravado stripped away, leaving only raw vulnerability. She looked like she might bolt at any second, a runner ready to escape if the truth turned too cruel. Eliza wanted to reach out, to tell her it was okay, that they would get through this together, but she couldn't. She had forfeited that right long ago. So she stayed silent, praying that somehow, this encounter could heal the wound she had caused, though it felt like too much to hope for. Then, through the flickering beams of sunlight filtering through the trees, Rebecca appeared. She walked slowly, deliberately, as though every step carried the weight of years spent in hiding. Her hair, once a cascade of deep brown, was now streaked with silver, but her eyes still held that fierce, defiant light that Eliza remembered so vividly. The sight of her made Eliza's breath hitch, a tear slipping unbidden down her cheek. Rebecca was real, alive, and each step she took made the moment more unbearable and beautiful. Rebecca's gaze met Eliza's first, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. 17 years couldn't erase the bond they once shared, nor the fractures left behind when everything fell apart. Her eyes then moved to Alex, who looked as if he'd been hit by a tidal wave of disbelief. But it was Skye who drew her focus last. Rebecca's face softened, and something indescribable passed between mother and daughter. Skye's lips parted, but no sound came, her emotions too tangled to express. "Eliza," Rebecca said, her voice cracking under the strain of 1,000 unsaid words. Eliza stepped forward, her hands trembling at her sides. Rebecca. The name was a benediction and a curse, a name she had whispered in grief and guilt so many times over the years. They stood there, two women who had loved and lost, who had made mistakes that defined more lives than just their own. The pain in Rebecca's eyes was a mirror of Eliza's own, and the guilt weighed heavier than ever. Skye took a hesitant step forward, her face a portrait of confusion and hope. "Mom," she whispered, the word breaking as it left her lips. Rebecca's breath caught, and she opened her arms, her body trembling as though she couldn't believe this was real. Skye didn't hesitate any longer. She closed the distance between them in a rush, throwing herself into her mother's embrace, and the sob that escaped her was raw and unfiltered, years of longing released in a single moment. Rebecca held her tightly, tears streaming down her own face as she murmured words only Skye could hear. It was a reunion steeped in the kind of heartbreak that never truly heals, a mother and daughter reunited after years stolen by choices and circumstances beyond their control. Eliza watched, the scene both devastating and beautiful, and she wondered if she had the right to witness this moment. She had played a part in the years of separation, even if her reasons had once felt justified. Alex took a step back, his eyes never leaving Rebecca. He looked as if he were staring at a ghost, the love and betrayal warring within him too complex to put into words. Finally, he managed, "How? How are you here, Rebecca?" His voice was low, but the tremor in it betrayed his disbelief. It was a question they all needed answered, a mystery that had twisted through each of their lives in different ways. Eliza braced herself, knowing the explanation would change everything. Rebecca released Skye reluctantly, brushing a tear from her daughter's face with the tenderness of a mother who had feared this reunion would never come. She turned to Alex, her expression one of grief and exhaustion. "I had to disappear," she said, her voice steadying with effort. "It was the only way to protect Skye. To protect all of you." The weight of her words settled like a stone, and Eliza's breath caught. Protection. The word carried layers of meaning she wasn't ready to face. Skye pulled back slightly, searching her mother's face for answers. From what? She demanded, her voice tight with desperation. What could have been so terrible that you had to leave everything behind? Her hands clutched at Rebecca's arms, as if she were afraid she might vanish again. The fear in Skye's voice broke something in Eliza, and she closed her eyes, haunted by the memories of choices made in desperation, and deals struck in the shadows. Rebecca's gaze darkened, her voice growing heavier with each word. From the people who threatened to take everything from us, she said. I made enemies, ones that went after Eliza too. We both paid for mistakes that should have stayed in the past. Her eyes flickered to Eliza, and the unspoken connection between them surfaced, a pact that had cost them dearly. Eliza's stomach twisted, knowing that this revelation was just the beginning, that the past was still reaching for them with claws. Eliza forced herself to speak, though her voice shook. The past never stays buried, she said, looking at Skye. But it's time we stopped running from it. The tension crackled around them, and Eliza knew that whatever came next, they would have to face it together, or risk losing each other all over again. The carousel spun in the background, a haunting lullaby to the second chances that came far too late but were still better than never. Rebecca's face was drawn with exhaustion, her eyes reflecting years of solitude and fear. The carousel behind her continued its slow, hypnotic spin, a cruel echo of the cycle of secrets and betrayals that had bound them all. Skye stood frozen beside her mother, clutching onto hope but feeling the weight of every unanswered question pressing down. Alex, standing a few feet away, still wore a look of disbelief, as if he couldn't reconcile the Rebecca he once knew with this woman, alive and standing before him. Rebecca, Alex began, his voice a ragged whisper. Tell me what happened. I thought you were gone he faltered, his emotions raw and exposed. The heartbreak and confusion in his eyes were almost too much to bear. Eliza took a small step back, not wanting to intrude on this moment, but unable to leave. She felt like an unwanted witness to the unraveling of their shared history, yet she knew she had a role to play in whatever explanation was coming. Rebecca swallowed, her hand trembling as she squeezed Skye's shoulder for strength. It wasn't an accident, she began, her voice heavy with pain. What happened all those years ago? The threats, the danger. It wasn't random. It was retaliation. My involvement in things that shouldn't have seen the light of day, combined with decisions Eliza and I made, brought consequences I never imagined. Her eyes found Eliza's, and they shared a look, old memories flaring to life. Skye's voice broke the tension, sharp and confused. What kind of danger? She looked between the two women, her gaze demanding answers that made Eliza's stomach twist. What could have been so terrible that you had to fake your death? That you had to leave me behind? Let me grow up thinking. Her voice cracked, and she clenched her jaw to stop herself from crying. The pain was etched into her features, years of confusion and abandonment suddenly making a dark, twisted kind of sense. Rebecca's grip on her daughter tightened. There were people who wanted me silenced, she said, the words slicing through the air. After I discovered some truths that powerful men would do anything to bury. I had evidence that could destroy lives, tear down entire empires. Her gaze shifted to Eliza. And Eliza's involvement, even if unintentional, put her in their crosshairs too. We both knew too much, and I had to disappear to protect you, Skye. Eliza winced, feeling the sharp edge of her own guilt. It had been a high-stakes world back then, one where whispers turned into threats, and loyalty was a rare commodity. She had walked away from Alex, not just to chase success, but because she knew that staying would endanger him. Her decision to distance herself from everyone she loved had been calculated, cruel even, but at the time, it had seemed like the only way to keep them all safe. Alex's eyes narrowed, his anger surfacing at last. So you left us, he said, his voice bitter and thick with hurt. You both left, knowing the danger, and I had no idea. You made that choice for me, for Skye, without ever asking. His pain was palpable, the betrayal cutting deeper than any blade. Eliza had never heard him sound so broken. and she realized that the years had only deepened the wounds she had inflicted. The damage was so much worse than she had imagined. Rebecca's face crumpled, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I know," she whispered. "I know what it cost you. And I'll never be able to make up for the years I lost, for the birthdays and the moments I missed. But if I hadn't left, they would have come for us all." Her voice grew firmer, as though she were pleading for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. "It was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone, and every day I spent in hiding I thought of you. Of both of you." Sky wiped at her eyes angrily, refusing to let herself break. "So all of this, the moving, the secrets, the running," she broke off, her voice cracking under the weight of understanding. "It was to protect me?" The realization didn't soothe her, it only added to the complexity of her pain. The life she'd led had always felt incomplete, shadowed by mysteries she could never solve. And now, standing here, the truth tasted bitter and confusing, not the catharsis she had imagined. Eliza found her voice, though it felt hollow in her throat. "We thought it would be enough," she said softly. "That if Rebecca stayed hidden and I distanced myself, we could keep you safe. But none of it was fair to you or to Alex." Her admission hurt more than she expected, and she wondered how many years it would take for her to atone. Sky's eyes met hers, a spark of something indescribable passing between them. Betrayal, understanding, grief, it was all there, wrapped up in a single look. Sky exhaled shakily, her anger and confusion still roiling beneath the surface. "So why now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why come back after all this time? What's changed?" The question hung heavily in the air, and Eliza felt her own anxiety spike. She knew that for Rebecca to resurface, the danger must be closer than they realized. The past, it seemed, was not content to stay buried, and whatever threat they had once escaped was now looming once more. Rebecca's face hardened, and she took a step forward, her jaw set. "Because they're back," she said, her voice a quiet storm. "The people who wanted us gone. They found me, and they know about Sky. We're out of time, and I can't hide any longer." The gravity of her words sent a chill through the group, the old carousel creaking eerily behind them. Eliza clenched her fists, her mind racing. The nightmare they had fought so hard to escape was back, and this time, they would have to face it together, or risk losing everything again. The weight of Rebecca's revelation pressed down on them, a suffocating reminder that the past had never truly let them go. The old carousel creaked and groaned in the breeze, casting warped reflections in its tarnished mirrors, as if mocking the twisted paths that had brought them here. Eliza's mind spun, grasping for any plan, any strategy, but the panic rising in her chest was an enemy she couldn't outmaneuver. The people who had hunted them before, who had driven Rebecca into hiding, now they were back, and the stakes were higher than ever. Alex's fists clenched at his sides. His eyes, usually so gentle, burned with a protective fury Eliza hadn't seen since their youth. "Who are these people, Rebecca?" he demanded, his voice tight with the effort of holding his anger in check. "What exactly did you get involved in?" He looked at Eliza too, the unspoken question hanging heavy between them. For years, he had been in the dark, a pawn in a game he didn't know existed. Now he wanted answers, and Eliza knew she owed him every truth, no matter how damning. Rebecca took a steadying breath, her hands never leaving Sky's shoulders. "Years ago, I uncovered a corruption ring tied to one of the most powerful real estate and financial empires in the country," she said. Her eyes met Eliza's, a shared acknowledgement of the skeletons in both their closets. People with money and influence beyond imagination. "I thought I could take them down, expose their crimes, but I underestimated their reach. When they found out I had evidence, they threatened to destroy everything." Eliza shivered at the memories that rose unbidden, the threats delivered in shadowy corners, the anonymous phone calls, the nights she slept with a knife under her pillow. She had walked away from Alex not just because she craved power and wealth, but because she knew these enemies wouldn't stop until they had everything. Rebecca's flight had been a desperate gamble, and Eliza's own betrayal had been an attempt to shield the only man she had ever loved. But she had also chosen ambition, and that guilt had never left her. Sky's voice cut through the tension, raw and angry. "So you ran," she said, shaking her head. Her gaze landed on Rebecca, then Eliza, disappointment flickering in her eyes. "Both of you. And you left me to grow up with half-truths and lies. You decided what was best. But what about what I needed?" Her pain was palpable, a child's need for stability and love that had never been fulfilled. Her words were a challenge, a dare for either of them to explain why their choices had come at the cost of her childhood. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she held herself steady. "I did what I had to," she whispered. "But if I could go back, if there was another way," she trailed off, her sorrow too heavy to complete the thought. Sky pulled away from her mother's touch, her heart torn between the love she felt and the anger she couldn't suppress. The betrayal was a scar she had carried alone for so long, and even now, understanding the reasons didn't make it easier. Alex stepped forward, his body tense. "We don't have time for regret," he said, his voice rough but resolute. "If they're coming after us again, we need to know what we're dealing with. What exactly do they want?" His question was simple, but the answer carried a world of complications. The man Eliza had once loved was still there, fiercely protective and brave, but she knew he was holding back a tidal wave of emotions. He had been left to raise Sky, to pick up the pieces of a broken life, and now he was being asked to fight once more. Rebecca hesitated, her eyes flickering to Sky, then back to Eliza. "The evidence I had was supposed to be destroyed," she admitted. "But I kept a piece of it, hidden away, as leverage. I knew they'd always be watching, waiting for a sign of weakness." Her voice grew hard. "But now, they must have found out that Sky exists. She's the key to everything." Sky's face paled, and she staggered back, the weight of the revelation crashing over her. "Me?" Sky choked out. "Why me?" Her voice was high-pitched, the fear unmistakable. It was one thing to search for answers about her past. It was another to realize she was the center of a storm far beyond her control. Her heart raced, and Eliza watched her, an unfamiliar pang of maternal instinct twisting in her chest. Sky had inherited a legacy she hadn't asked for, one born of choices made long before she had any say in the matter. Eliza stepped forward, her voice low and steady. "Because you represent everything they tried to erase," she said, her businesslike composure hiding the fear swirling beneath. "You're proof of what they did and what they tried to cover up. They'll come for you because you're the last link to their sins." Her words were harsh, but the urgency was real. There would be no more running, no more half measures. If they were to protect Sky, it would mean confronting a past that had only ever brought destruction. The air was thick with tension, but suddenly, a rustling in the trees made them all turn. Out of the shadows stepped a man dressed in a dark suit, his expression cold and calculating. Eliza's blood ran cold as she recognized him, an enforcer from the past, one of the men who had delivered threats with a smile. He approached slowly, clapping his hands mockingly. "Well, well," he drawled. "A family reunion. How touching." Rebecca stepped in front of Sky instinctively, her body shielding her daughter. Alex moved forward, a protective wall of rage. Eliza clenched her fists, every muscle tensed. The man's smile widened. "You really thought you could keep the past buried," he sneered. "We're here to collect what's owed. And trust me, we're not leaving empty-handed." His eyes zeroed in on Sky, and Eliza knew they had run out of time. The reckoning had arrived, and this time, there would be no escape. The park had fallen into a tense, eerie silence, broken only by the faint creak of the carousel and the soft rustling of leaves. The enforcer stood a few paces away, his suit impeccable, his presence a dark stain against the sunlit backdrop. His eyes gleamed with cold amusement as he surveyed the group. Eliza could feel her pulse hammering in her throat, but she forced herself to stand tall, drawing on every ounce of the poise she had mastered in the ruthless world of business. Fear had been her undoing once before. Not this time. Alex stepped forward, his body taut with fury. His love for Sky, and the years he had spent protecting her, fueled his resolve, and his voice was steady, defiant. "Leave her alone," he demanded, his fists clenched. You've taken enough from this family. We're done running. His words rang with a truth that even surprised Eliza. The man she had left behind, broken and betrayed, had become a fortress. And now, he stood ready to shield Skye with his life. The enforcer's smile didn't waver, but his eyes darkened. "Bold words," he said, his voice as smooth as poison. "But it's not up to you anymore. Your little secret," his gaze shifted to Skye, "belongs to us now. You have something we want, and we'll get it. One way or another." The threat hung heavy in the air, and Skye recoiled, her terror palpable. Eliza's chest tightened. She had made so many mistakes, but this moment wasn't going to be one of them. Rebecca stepped in front of Skye, her body a shield. "You won't touch her," she spat, her voice like steel. The years in hiding had not weakened her spirit, they had honed it into something unbreakable. "I have evidence," she continued, her words sharp enough to cut. "A final piece of leverage that will destroy your entire organization if anything happens to her. You're not as invincible as you think." Her words made the enforcer's smile falter, a crack in his arrogance. Eliza knew Rebecca's gamble was dangerous, but it was also the only hope they had. She stepped beside her old friend, drawing on the strength they had once shared. "You want power?" Eliza said, her voice cool and commanding. "You thrive on fear, on control. But we're done being your pawns. If you want a fight, you'll get one. But make no mistake, you will lose." The enforcer's gaze snapped to hers, and for the first time, she saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. The tables had shifted. Skye, who had been silent, now found her voice. She stepped forward, her hands trembling but her chin held high. "I've spent my whole life being scared," she said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. "Scared of what I didn't know. Scared of the ghosts in my past. But I'm not running anymore." Her defiance shone through, and Eliza felt a surge of pride and awe. Skye had been forged in the fire of their mistakes, and she had come out stronger, more resilient than any of them could have hoped. The enforcer's composure wavered, but he recovered quickly, his jaw tightening. "This isn't over," he hissed. His hand moved subtly to the inside of his suit jacket, and Eliza's heart stopped. A threat, a final move. He was going to force their hand. But before he could act, Alex lunged forward, tackling the enforcer to the ground. The two men struggled, the clash of bodies and the dull thud of fists echoing through the park. Alex fought with the desperation of a father protecting his child, and Eliza realized, breathless, that he was willing to sacrifice everything. Rebecca grabbed Skye, pulling her back, but Skye resisted. She refused to stand by and watch any longer. In one swift motion, she bent down, grabbed a fallen tree branch, and swung it with all her strength at the enforcer, who was trying to shove Alex away. The branch cracked against the man's arm, and he let out a grunt of pain, his grip loosening. Alex managed to land one more punch, knocking the enforcer out cold. The man crumpled to the ground, his threat silenced, if only for now. The park went still, the world holding its breath. Alex stumbled to his feet, his face bruised but victorious. He pulled Skye into a fierce embrace, his hands shaking. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I've got you." Skye clung to him, her tears finally spilling over. But this time, they were tears of release, of knowing she was safe. Eliza felt her own tears threaten, but she forced herself to stay composed. There was still more to do. Rebecca knelt beside the unconscious enforcer, her face etched with grim determination. "He won't be the last," she said. "But now they know we're not afraid. We have to be ready for whatever comes next." Eliza nodded, a fierce protectiveness burning in her chest. They had faced the shadows of their past, but the future was still uncertain. Yet, something had shifted. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a family, fractured but willing to fight. Skye stepped back from Alex, wiping her tears and lifting her chin. She looked at Eliza and Rebecca, her eyes full of questions and possibilities. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. Eliza exchanged a look with Rebecca, and for the first time in years, they understood each other without words. There was no easy answer, no simple resolution. But they had a chance to heal, to fight, to protect each other. Eliza placed a hand on Sky's shoulder, her voice soft but unbreakable. "Now," she said, "we prepare. Together." It wasn't a promise of peace or an end to their troubles. But it was a promise of strength, of unity, and of facing whatever came next, no matter how dark. The carousel behind them creaked one last time, and the sun dipped low, casting golden light over their small circle. They had come full circle, but this time they were ready.
We'd love to hear if you're excited about this story. If you had a good time watching the video, go ahead and press 1. If that's not the case, just press 0. Your feedback truly motivates me to collect more heartwarming and significant stories. I'm going to turn this one over to you. What do you make of this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart for getting involved in today's stories. Your love, support, and time mean the world to me.